Test. Okay. Hello, everyone out there. How y'all feeling? That was super weak. How y'all feeling? All right. That's more like it. HU? You want me to know? All right. Welcome to Sankofa Video and Books. Is this anyone's first time being here? Great. Oh, can we give it up for the sister in the back? My name is Michaela. I'm so happy to have you guys here. Sankofa Video and Books. We're one of the oldest Black-owned or the oldest Black-owned bookstore in the DMV area. Clap it up for surviving gentrification, and hopefully we'll be around for 25 more years. Yes, we are celebrating our 25th year anniversary, as well as the 30th anniversary of the film Sankofa, which can be streamed on Netflix. Yes, we are about to start the Taste of Howard Writers Part 2. We have featured guest Dr. Joshua Myers, who's the creator-curator. We have poet and writer Alan King, and also poet and writer Angel C. Dye. We're happy to have them here. I'm happy that they'll also be reading some of their works now. We talk about it so you get to experience it with them. And without further ado, please give them a round of applause. And I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Joshua Myers.
All right, thank you, Michaela. So, how's everybody doing? Happy homecoming. So this idea, I think, came from several places, bringing Howard writers together. And so the first year was last year, and the idea was really sparked by me noticing that in my class of 2009, we had, by our 10-year reunion, we had established several writers who had published with major publishers. And some with not so major publishers, which is fine with me, because sometimes the major publishers get in the way of good Black scholarship and good Black thinking. But the fact that in just 10 years, we had established so many writers, and I thought that, we need to interrogate what happened while we were students to make us become writers, and what made Howard hospitable to our development as writers. And so Candace Elo, Allison Rollins, and several others, we came together last year. We were disrupted by the pandemic in 2020, 2021. So we came together last year to talk about it. And it was a great event. We added others from class of 2009 to that event. So it was a great event, and we decided to do it again this year. So here we are. And so for those who may not know me, my name is Joshua Myers. I also teach at Howard University. I've been teaching Africana Studies since 2013. I also edit the Gathering Together literary journal. Angel has published with us the Gathering Together as well. And so I'm the author of 3 books. They're all here. Thank you, Sankofa, for always having my book. All 3 books were launched at Sankofa. The first book, We're Fighting For, the History of the Howard University Student Protest of 1989, 2019. My second book is Cedric Robinson, The Time of the Black Radical Tradition, a biography of Cedric Robinson, 2021. And then earlier this year, I launched my third book, Black Study. And so those are my books. I have a new book coming out in February. No, it's known. It's actually, I won the Naomi Long Magic Book Award. Yes. Thank you. And so Broadside Lotus Press, when Paul Coates is around, he talks about our legacy publishers, right? But interestingly enough, he said that, Broadside is actually the parents of the legacy publishers. That's how he phrased it. So for him, Broadside comes first, which is true. It comes before Third World Press and after World Press, Black Classic Press, which he considers the legacy publishers. So it's an honor to be published by Broadside Lotus. They only publish 1 book a year, which is the award-winning book. And so my book is called Holy Ghost Key. Perhaps I'll read from it tonight or today. But I'm going to stop talking and introduce the other two writers. And I had it set up here, and I lost it. I'm not an iPhone reader usually. But I'll start with Angel C. Dye, who I met when she was a student at Howard. Mentee of my really, really good friend, the poet Shauna Morgan. And I don't know, you're from Texas, right?
Yes.
So there's something about those Texas Black folk. Very special. In fact, I spent some time in Texas this summer. I've always celebrated Juneteenth, but I've never celebrated it in Texas before this year. It's a very different thing. So, if I can get this bio to come up, I will read it. That's what I'm about to pivot to in a second. Because when you need to use the search function in your email, it doesn't come up. Let's do that. And I used to be one of those people that I'm not going to read your formal bio, but I think it's important. You work on these bios, so they should be read, right? Angel C. Dye is a poet, scholar of African American literature, and I hear the influence of Dana Williams in that in that phrase. The dean of the graduate school, but also the former chair of the English department, who is Angel's other mentor. She's the author of Breathe from Central Square Press, Black-owned press. She's from Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas, by way of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a graduate of Howard University and holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of Kentucky, where she was a Nikki Finney Fellow. My God. Dye has received fellowships from the Watering Hole. I'm also a Watering Hole Fellow. Yes. Furious Flower Poetry Center, and her work has appeared in Blue Mountain Review, Tahoma Literary Review, Southwestern Literary Magazine, the Gathering Together Journal, and the Langston Hughes Review, among others. She is currently a PhD candidate in English at Rutgers, State University of New York, and I'm holding her brand new book. Out this month, right?
Out 2 weeks ago.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Clap it up, please. Because this too is an award-winning book. What's the name of the chapbook, Price?
Yeah. So this book is published by another Black-owned press, based out of Durham, North Carolina. And this chapbook was runner-up in their 5th annual chapbook competition this summer.
So the title is My Mouth, a Constant Prayer. I'm sure she will talk about it more in a second. All right. Now, is your bio current in your All right, sitting next to me is one of the great poets of this region, of the generation. And I'm really interested in talking about that. But this, those who were at Howard in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, that whole generation of writers. Alan King. So Alan King is a Caribbean American whose parents immigrated from Trinidad and Tobago to the US in the 1970s. Yes. He's a husband, father, and communications professional who blogs about art and social issues at alanwking.com. A Cave Canem graduate fellow, he holds a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from the Stone Coast program at the University of Southern Maine. He's a 2-time Pushcart Prize nominee and was nominated 3 times for a Best of the Net selection. He lives with his family in Bowie, Maryland. And so, thank you to Alan, thank you to Angel for being here. We were also going to be joined by Abdul Ali, Melanie Henderson, and Ebony LaDelle, but there was a scheduling issue, and so we're still going to go forth with this event. So thank you all for being here, and without further ado, who wants to go first? What's the protocol here?
Ladies first.
Okay. I like to ask.
I felt that coming.
Every room has its own understanding of that, and so we want to respect that. Sometimes it's elders first, and then who's the elder? Or anyway, so we're gonna do readings first, and then we're going to have a bit of a conversation about the influence of power on our writing practice. And so, Angel, I think you're up.
Thank you so much, Dr. Myers, for inviting me, for having me here today. It's an honor to be asked back to my alma mater. It's always a joy and a pleasure to come home to Howard, to DC. And I say home because Howard is one of my homes. But it was a special honor to get the request to come and be a part of this series, which I think is so wonderful and so necessary, and being hosted at such a beautiful and historic space as Sankofa. So thank you so much for having me, Alan. I'm honored to be here with you today, and I'm going to read from both of my two poetry collections, Breathe and the newest one, My Mouth, A Constant Prayer. So I'll read a few poems from Breathe, and then I'll let you get a taste of what My Mouth, A Constant Prayer has to offer, no pun intended, with the mouthpiece. And I'll just say, Breathe was published in August of 2021 from Central Square Press, which is based in Swampscott, Massachusetts. And it's a collection of poems that were written over the course of about 5 years. So when I read these poems, I see myself at different stages of my life because they were written at different stages of my life. And so you'll hear some of that in here. Some of these poems are about transition. They're about becoming self-discovery. But in any case, all of them share in common the fact that I was really grappling with how I could breathe through pain, how I could breathe through transition, how I could breathe through uncertainty, and really fully exhale in a way that allowed me to feel free and like myself. So this poem is called Tapestry. There are dangling threads and strands, frayed, loose, hanging around the hems of my skin. Two knotted a long time ago, ripped to shreds and were never able to mend. I am their tapestry, their crooked cloth, their patch on ripped knee jeans and snagged shirts. Sometimes we all tangle into each other. I feel one's blue-black eyes the same way I feel the other's doped veins and venom. They are separate ends of the same bolt of fabric. I am all that joins them now. Sometimes I want to be my own, not theirs, thimbled against the pricks drawing my blood. I am them, even with new stitches, hanging on to what I think is their regard for me by a thread, safety pinning the pieces they've left me with just to make something wearable. I am wearing too big and too small skin that they draped and stretched over me when they felt like it. And now I am old enough to tailor myself into whatever I want to be. Of course, I will have to washboard, bathe the rags I have been for 20 years, but once I am wrung out and hung to drip dry, I will soak up sun like it is all that can revive the violets and rubies of my cloth that have faded. I will wear the two ends of my newly stitched garment, and their knots and tangles will not strangle me, but they will make me whole. You can probably tell that poem is about my parents, about where I come from, the two people who made me, which has always been something that I've wrestled with because I was raised by a single mother, but I'm the product of a father who's been incarcerated since I was 5 years old, so almost 25 years in prison. And that is a battle, negotiation, all its own carceral system, but what that means for a family, what that means for a daughter. So this is the title poem from the collection. It's called Breathe. And it's taken from a tweet that I saw by Jamila Lemieux, the wonderful Howard University alumna and journalist. And the tweet simply said, I breathe for Black girls. 1, I breathe for Black girls who came to the realization that they were Black girls by being told it was the wrong thing to be. Don't know whether they're deaf or insane from the screams, slamming doors in the hallways of their minds, been bent and broken, who think they're contortionists, because all they ever do is morph. hate harder than they heal, and holler more than they exhale. Hands bloody from birthing seeds they never planted in their own gardens, and empty from only knowing to pass them along, too. I breathe for Black girls whose names we gotta chant and march for to make sure they remembered. Lives snuffed out like candles, but not broadcasted for better days. Cases wide open, caskets closed, questions unanswered, and eulogies written in hashtags. 3. I breathe for Black girls who unconventional. Read comics, cosplay, code web pages, color their hair to match their mood, got more books than friends, more high scores than high heels, and brains as much as beauty. Tomboys, outliers, and every meticulous mark on the spectrum. 4. I breathe for Black girls who gotta fight themselves, other folks, and all the things designed to destroy them, who choose to fight for the men who are often the furrow in their brow, who stay and fight when masses and movements reject them and wrap them in misogynoir by refusing to listen, respect, and respond. 5. I breathe for Black girls who feminism ain't a one-way street, who politics is necessarily intersectional because they don't fit comfortably into boxes, whose ears tuned and eyes keen because their survival demands activism, breaths steadied by the blessings of their ancestors and the bravery of bearing witness. Thank you. I'll read one last one from this collection, and then I'll transition to the new collection. This poem came from beginning my therapy journey back in 2017, which actually happened here at Howard. I just finally made a decision. My friends and I actually made like a therapy pact. 3 of us were like, hey, if you go, I'll go, because we all knew we needed to go, but we're not going to do it on our own. So we supported one another through beginning therapy. And all 3 of us were the first in our immediate families to do that, to go to therapy and to start working towards something like healing. So this poem is called Resisting Self-Diagnosis on the Road to Healing. And you'll see I like to play with numbers and lists in my poems. 1, the first thing to remember is to forget the word crazy. It's a knee-jerk reaction after an attack, sweeping away panic in the metro station. You cannot see any other rationale above the flood in your eyes. Gathering the embers of an unexpectedly stoked flame feels like hopscotching on the edge of insanity. Swallow the curse away from your lips. Bury it between the staccato breaths struggling to steady in your chest. 2, uncork the bottle of your body, where secrets are stored away and sealed under pressure. You practice sweetening conversations with extroversion and concealing smiles, but be brave enough to bleed between lines, if only for yourself to see. 3, watch the garden that grew you wither from the weight of its own rain. Wonder if it is really just a field of weeds. Wonder if you are too. Still, resist its heirloom terminology. 4, weaving faith and the desire to be fixed together will leave you knotted and tangled until you are prey in your own web. If you are going to kneel, pray for strength. Then rise, realizing that you are not broken. 5, resolve to take the static and screeching inside of you seriously. Even when you have to crawl or tiptoe toward your truths, trust the counsel in the footprint stamped before you. Allow it to sketch a legend and compass to your cartography. 6, when silence deafens and sadness engulfs, reach for the raft of love surrounding you. When the tide recedes, remember to forget the word crazy. Instead, teach your mouth whole until it is true. Thank you so much. That collection feels very different to me now, 2 years later, than this one, My Mouth of Constant Prayer, because Those poems are very raw, they're very personal, as you can tell, very intimate. I was very scared to put that collection into the world. And I talked with my publisher about this. He read the poems, obviously, and he was like, you have to publish these. And I said, my family is going to read these, and none of them are going to talk to me ever again. But none of the things that I imagined bad happening with that collection happened. Actually, it was quite the opposite. People said to me, I appreciate your honesty and your vulnerability. It encouraged me. I've had experiences like this too. So that's why we do what we do, right? With the hope that, you know, maybe somebody who's still trying to gather their words will get the courage to do that from seeing us share ours. This poem is called Countdown. You'll see in it the title for the collection. Usually, I hand the station attendant my card and ask him to fill my Ford to the brim. Now, I reluctantly give him a 20, knowing it will not get me anywhere near full. I budget out money for meals I know I won't enjoy, but am resigned to eat because they're at home. Rent hurts more each month, my mouth a constant prayer. I get unexpectedly sick and sicker at the sight of $12.99 for meds. Tell myself the studies and earnest efforts will one day pay. Poems will give me more than peace. But I am afraid always of coming up short, one time too many, and knowing the depth of nothing. Whew, I have to say shout out to one of my longtime friends who just walked in. Hey, thank you for coming. Okay, this poem is an homage, an ode, maybe an elegy to Toni Morrison, the giant who we all loved, still love. Toni Morrison paved the way for so much of how I think about the world, how I feel comfortable expressing myself through words. And when she ascended and became an ancestor, I felt that so deeply. It was like losing a relative for me. And so I tried to capture some of that grief, but also some of that honor in this poem. And this poem is published in the Gathering Together journal, which Dr. Joshua Myers is the editor of. So this is a poem for Toni. She gathered me at an altar festooned for ancestors, baptize me in Florida water, then wring the wet from my tresses. She paint me aqua, indigo, screaming cerulean, the bluest blue, high yellow, sugar brown. She waxed wings for me, strapped them to my bent back, ironed my spine and pushed me skyward. She tell me give up that stuff, them bricks, them shackles. She see me, big, vast, middle passage, wide and weary, haint, holding my jagged throat. She see me, see me, girl, 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 circling. Thank you. Many of the words, lines in that poem are borrowed. I'm sorry, I didn't even finish the poem, y'all. She plucked the rose over my eye. Say, fly. Place my best thing in my palm, and the hand there is mine. There we go. Yeah, that's a more hopeful ending. But yes, those lines, some of those lines, words, images are borrowed from Toni Morrison's novels. Namely, you'll see resonances of Sula in that poem, the girl, 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 the rose over Sula's eye. Yeah, there's a quote from Toni Morrison that says, if you want to fly, you got to give up the shit that weighs you down. So that's in there. That's my homage to our ancestor, Toni Morrison. I'm wrapping up, as the preacher said. I'm closing soon. You know, we've all been living through this pandemic and the afterlife of the peak of that in 2020. And one of the things that was most difficult for me to grapple with during that time was doing a doctorate on Zoom. I moved across the country to do a PhD and ended up doing most of it from my bedroom in my pajamas. And what I noticed during that time is that people had a real hard time distinguishing my other Black woman colleague and I from each other, even though they had met us in person. They often called us the wrong name, even though our names were there on the screen. So this is me working through whiteness and microaggressions. Remote learning. Microaggression translates. I mean, it knows how to zoom and work the room the same way it works my nerves and embarrasses me to my face, even in a virtual space. My Black woman colleague and I are consistently collapsed, confused for each other, named with misnomer. When our white colleagues call her me or me her, we scoff. When a brown colleague trips, I am thrown off. It's in the brevity, the small moments that if you blink, you'll miss. Or at least you'll second guess yourself thinking you couldn't have heard it. A professor teaching us French casually transforms a newspaper headline about George Floyd into palatable English, which triggers the two, the only two, the always two Black women whose names Madame also transforms into twins. We laugh, we lament, junior scholars just at the beginning, a long career ahead of this. Did you stumble? Did you forget? Glance too quickly? Slip? Are you trying? Do you care? Because my name is right there in the bottom left of that little video square, and everywhere and nowhere. All right, I've got two more brief ones and I will be done. This poem is called Soft Life. There's a whole social media movement about the soft life and soft living, especially as it pertains to Black women. And I've been thinking about what softness means for me, but also for the people in my life. And it's not just bubble baths and face masks. It's not just rest and therapy, although those things are also really wonderful. But for me, softness would be being seen in the world as my full self, being appreciated for all that I am, and being able to reciprocate that fully without fear. So this poem is called Soft Life. Black girl breakdown is different from regular breakdown. Complicated by carrying on while carrying a load, being solid for everyone but your fragile self. Strong Black woman when you want to be weak and willowy. Shattering glass ceilings when you are fragments. Pulling it together and putting on a brave face, knowing you cannot parade your pieces. Belittled and gaslit, but grinning and bearing it while choking on a scream. Putting a good cry on your calendar and postponing falling apart until your schedule is clearer. Texting your therapist to pencil you in for never-ending inner work, tired and steely inside, but tender outside, because you are manifesting a soft life. But right now, you just want to lie down and take your time rising. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being such a generous, wonderful listening audience. I'm going to end with a celebratory poem. This poem is called Sonnet of Ourselves, and it's about us. It's about Black people and all of the myriad iterations that we come in, the beauty that we are, the brilliance that we are, and then the people who see that and want to capitalize on that. So this is Sonnet of Ourselves. It is a traditional Shakespearean sonnet. They love our dazzle and adornments, flattery flaunted as imitation. They love our two-step and performance, digital trends, viral sensation. They love our rhythm, sing our blues, chart-topping sample and riff mastered. They manufacture, bottle, peddle our hues, rush the making of high art till its pieces scattered. They miss the detail and intricacy of our glory, brilliance forged before ship, sea, or sail. They market textbooks of something called his story, though our understanding stems from passed down tales. We dance without regard for their eyes or half-spun tragic love in stitches and loops of reinvention, quilting magic. Thank you so much.
All right, well, I guess I'm next. I want to start by thanking Dr. Myers for the invitation. I want to thank Michaela and Seiko for Books for hosting us. And Angel and I just met, and I didn't get a chance to ask you, like when you were in Kentucky, if you connected with the Affirmation poets, but it was so awesome to hear that you connected with Nikki Finney, so very awesome. So, oh, Friggins, okay, founder. Yeah, awesome, awesome. So I'm just gonna jump into these pieces. I'll be bouncing around. I'm not gonna read from Drift. I'm gonna bounce from Point Blank to Crooked Smiling Light, and then one new poem out of that. So the first poem, I always have to just give this brief story, but my wife and I, we commute, and it's a 45-minute commute, so that's very important that I say it's 45 minutes. So we get ready to go home, and I'll ask her, I said, how was your day? Like, she's just gone. And then in like the remaining 15 minutes, remember it's a 45-minute commute, the remaining 15 minutes, oh, I'm sorry, how was your day? So we've been together for like 14 years, and so my way of dealing with it is I just go on the autopilot. Oh, for real? Oh, okay. And so I'm listening, but listening just enough to register the right emotional response. So this poem, and the autopilot gets worse when I'm hungry. So this is a situation here. I wanted bananas, a bunch of them, spooned body to body like small yellow kayaks. So I missed what you said about the war in Libya. When you say Gaddafi, I think of how they spoil if they sit too long on their wicker thrones. We're in my car, listening to WTOP. We passed the Spanish market that calls what I love plátanos. Just saying plata, my tongue snaps like the slingshot's elastic strip, hurling A's like stones. You complain about the weak radio signal. I could nod and punctuate your frustrations with hums, as if I'm listening, as if my head weren't full of hunger's SOS. I could pretend that the radio static is annoying, as if the sizzling sound it makes doesn't have me thinking of sweet, chunky rumba slices frying in my mother's skillet, or plantains boiled whole with dasheen, dumplings, and potatoes to eat with saltfish and coconut bake, plates and plates of large bananas, edible boomerangs, nature's golden sugar-filled tusk, the moon's waning frown, or waxing smile. Thank you. So these next two poems I'm going to read, actually August of this year marked 5 years since my wife and since our surgeries. And that's all I'll say. The poems are self-explanatory, so I'll just go right into them. Beacon. An intern asked, aren't you scared? And you remember the hospital clerk saying what you're doing is courageous. You do what you have to for your wife whose life is leashed to a box, cleaning her blood before spooling it back into her body. It does what it has to because her kidneys can't. And weren't they courageous standing their ground before lupus took them out? Its gluttony left you scratching your head, lost in this new life. The one that marks you donor and your wife recipient. The one where the transplant center's another turf to navigate. This life where words like renal failure and nephrectomy season your new tongue. You watch your wife sleep while the machine chimes and beeps, remembering the intern's question. Of course, there were moments that gobbled your bravery to a morsel. The emergency room visits, lupus nearly taking her out. And isn't she the courageous one? How she welcomes each day, even those where grief is the overcast sky. Those moments when the only light is a heroic heart, blazing these dark streets, winding beyond the mysterious and unknown into the light. You're a floor below me, healing in your room. Both of us soar from the divine puppetry of science. God pulling the surgeon's strings, sliding the kidney from inside me, routing into its new body in Connecticut. And wasn't he present in the hands deft dance and how hope lit the operating room like a stage? Your new kidney ready for its debut inside you, having traveled in a freight of prayers, 17 hours from Minneapolis to DC. Didn't our road here seem even longer, not being a direct match? The hiccup in lab results, us hurling our names into an exchange pool deep with uncertainty. And here we are, in our beds, an elevator ride from each other. This moment, like the 90-degree day beyond our windows, the cloudless sky, shadows receding in the sunlight. Thank you. Gluttony. Combing the bargain bin. A woman who's not your wife brushes beside you asking if the Roy Hargrove CD you're holding is any good. She's close enough for you to smell her ginger patchouli body wash, the angle she gives you in her leather bomber jacket, the one unzipped showing a white tee retracing her athletic stomach and arms, the jacket with its collar flared, makes her a bright blossom booming its honeydew-scented tune along her neckline. And your father's voice from 2 decades before warns you about gorging on everything you see. You were 16 the first time he told you, when your hunger hovered like that summer at Myrtle Beach, sister strutting the boardwalk beneath a honey barbecue sun whose sweet light made each of them a long stretch of marinade, a chromatic scale of flavors along which your tongue was burning to play. And isn't temptation always lurking, eager to hold our common sense hostage? You tell the flower woman you're married after she points to a flyer for a root show and says y'all should go. When she asks, are you happy? You remember a brother once asking how you could love one woman when the world's a buffet. The possibilities of pleasure laid out like jumbo crab cakes, lasagna rolls, and buffalo wings. What's gluttony if not a symptom of our own hunger consuming us? Wasn't Jack as careless selling his sustenance for a handful of beans? You remember the story of the stalk that almost made him a hungry giant's grub. You still hear the pastor preaching about gluttons, wearing the rags of drowsiness, which is how your wife found you, stumbling through the days. Your life before her was a stringless violin, a dark garden of wilted sunflowers, a camper trailer molding against a moldy brick wall, rusting against a moldy brick wall. You were once a city of power lines, boarded up clock towers, jumped cars, and blazing drum barrel fires. What she saw in you, only her heart knows. Just like it knew you'd leave the temptress back at the listening booth, watching the automatic doors close behind you. At 16, you thought all there was to living was filling your appetite. Too young to know love is the everyday meal, that the lack of it kills quicker than the absence of food. So this next poem is for my daughter Jade Rose. She's 3 now, and it's also for George Floyd. And it's called The Land of Innocence. A YouTube clip shows a protest ignited after police killed George Floyd. Torch SUVs, overturned cop cars, armored officers retreating. All of that sinks my wife into a deeper postpartum, having made it through our personal crisis. We watched the python of despair coil itself around America, blowing out glass storefronts and colliding angry bodies as the tension constricts and crushes. We're miles from the mayhem, but a different kind of danger finds us in the maternity ward, a decreasing heartbeat, Frenzied nurses rushing my wife to the OR, surgeons scrambling to save our daughter. Watching the news, I'm reminded of slogans on chaos as necessity. Real discoveries come from chaos. Chaos is beautiful and full of fertility. But when it's a violent pattern of reactions, what's the real discovery? Where's the beauty in things shattered and tagged if the same pattern of injustice ripples our lives? So maybe chaos isn't the word. Let's try instead challenge. And since it means refuting the truth or its validity, isn't a protest a public dispute of someone else's truth? Like the one about the fear of dark bodies, how it justifies us being mangled or discredited in news cycles. Wouldn't the beauty then be new laws that get us closer to becoming the people the Constitution claims it protects? Let me begin again. When my wife told me several months ago she was pregnant, we knew the challenge of this birth could take her life, just as the challenge in the hospital threatened our daughters. And isn't it an act of faith to go blindfolded into the future and be delighted by the light there? Now we're lit by a dancing star named Jade, short for Jaresola, which in Yoruba means come into wealth. She's jade like the green stone, said to emit wisdom and clarity. I'm feeding her while watching the YouTube video. Someone on screen yells, "We're better than this." And she squeals, mouth dripping with her mother's milk, smiling while dreaming her baby dreams. That land of innocence, where it all starts before we lose our way back, rationalizing our destruction. Thank you. And so the last poem is another poem. This one is for actually both of my daughters and my wife. It's called Refractions. And again, just want to thank Dr. Myers, Angel, awesome hearing your work. And thank you all for coming out and being an attentive audience. So this is Refractions. You're mowing the lawn, the percussive hiccup of hip hop in your earbuds when Black Thought spits. Some nights I lay awake and feel all of my thoughts running. I tally my regrets, upsets, and shortcomings. And the squeals cut through the drums. It's your daughters, Jade Rose chasing her big sis, yelling Jasmine, as they dash around the bird bath. Your wife smiling at their bright joy as she plants her begonias and blue hostas. It's spring, 80 degrees, nearly hot enough to warp your view of distant things. And didn't this life once seem an illusion? The future, a liquid tease, stunningly bent like colorful refractions. You were once light bouncing between love's missed opportunities. Those decades ago when you and the guys crowded a traffic light control box, you all made your table, nearly oblivious to passers-by, except the sisters blossoming in their sundresses, the ones who tensed up as they got close, having to pass y'all on their way to drinks and happy hour specials, waiting for cat calls that didn't come. And when there were no thirsty stares, did they see brothers aching for love's prism to send each of them beaming in all directions? Yo, D said, I want a family. Jay shook his head. This life is for the birds. Is that why the sisters lingered just close enough to hear y'all doo-wop and blues on a Friday with the late spring light dawdling beyond the threshold of dusk? Is this why one of them found the courage to approach and said, I never knew guys talked about things like this. But hadn't you popped your ball at what looked promising before she flicked you away like a cigarette from a driver's side window? Hadn't you done the same? And a world away, your wife had her thorny journey. Regrets are stones along a path everyone travels before they're enlightened. Yours brought you here to a house on a sunny corner. Your wife watering the bushes. You taking in the humid air spiced by your daughter's laughter, splitting this life into its splendid bright angles. Thank you.
Wow. I kind of wanted to just let that simmer a little bit. Whew. So I'm going to switch it up a little bit and read some prose. This is from my book, A Black Study, which is a book that talks about the relationship between the study of Black life and the way that Black life has been imagined by Black people, and how when those two things happen together, different ways of being in the academy, being in connection to knowledge, being in community, become readily apparent, which means we have to make different choices. And so my way of thinking about that big question is through some lights, through some guides, through some beings who showed me that in their example, but also in their written work, in the way that they build community. And Angel, when you were reading about particularly the last poem, I think it's the last one with the microaggressions, right? Or second to the last. I had to pause because this is I don't want to use the word insanity, but there's something akin to insanity that happens in the academy. And it led me to both Sylvia Wynter and Toni Cade Bambara. And there are chapters on each in this particular book. So I'm going to first read from the Sylvia Wynter chapter, a section called Stories Are All We Have. There are only stories, no matter how hard we try. We cannot escape the stories we are told of who we are and what we are. When Africans arrived to the so-called New World, forcibly taken from home, it was in consequence of a story. Yet those same Africans told stories too. They passed down memories of how we got here, there, who we were before, and who we are now. They told us of the coming and what it meant. Yet there were other kinds of stories. They gathered together tales of how community was forged, how we defined ourselves amid the disaster. And they used stories to tell us how to survive, constructing wisdom texts with moral lessons on the meanings of trust, love, and right. Those texts archived our past long before the penetration of Black elite into Western academic spaces. We had our languages and our names stripped from us, but not the real meanings of the words. Our music was attacked, but they could never steal the rhythm and the blues. Our foodways and methods for healing were disrupted, so we found spices, roots, otherwise. And these are all stories. The memory of how to create, survive, improvise, and never forget the sources of our world and word is how we got over. And these are all stories. The refusal to consent to degradation created the foundations for the Black radical tradition. And these are all stories. We made meaning out of a way, out of no way. We remembered a God who came to our aid in the time of need, opening the way with our song and dance and our stories. Sylvia Wynter was shaped by these stories. It was her grounding in these traditions, her search inward, that allowed her to see that the present order of knowledge was also a story. Like so many of us, she was thrust into an intellectual world that disrupted the consciousness she brought to those institutions. She turned to the John Canoe ritual. She turned to the Rastafarians. She turned to the blues. She turned to a, quote, cultural matrix that is not frozen into dogma, into a ritual, not dead and therefore dangerous, not mannered, not repetitive, not gesture, not posture, not the regulation, end quote. This turning to is a form of Black study, a kind of break in intervention that is all about unsettling and undoing what Western thought thinks it knows about Black people. But our human project has never lost sight of the fact that the story they tell has never negated our story. Yes, it converges with it, producing the volatile confrontations that make us vulnerable and threatened, but we have yet to fully concede the blues. There is strength in our story, a strength that is rooted in materials different from the biocentric assumptions embedded in such police concepts as no humans involved, such police concepts as eugenics, such police concepts as Western philosophy. If what it means to be human is but a story, we have to remind ourselves constantly that it's not a singular one, no matter how powerful or painful we think the current order is. For after all, as Winter wrote, it is it or us. So we must think about the us as much as we think about the it. The concept of the human, then, is not about closure, unless we mean a liberal, mono-humanist closure and exclusion. What Winter is after, and what we must be after, is a human project that is an invitation to ourselves, that reinitiates us into what we were doing before we were so rudely interrupted by the present order of knowledge, the plantation regime that inaugurated the modern world system. It is because humans are to blame in these stories of man's overrepresentation as human that Black study becomes necessarily something other than an interdisciplinary project. The disciplines are not the route to the horizon of possibilities after man. Black studies can be a route, but we will have to tell different stories. We will have to tell our stories. I was going to take that one. But I do want to read Tony too, inspired by Angel. Or read about Tony. So this is from the conclusion to the book, and this is a piece that I wrote in response to the notion of dreaming. So Toni Cade Bambara has this piece that she wrote when she was very young and a professor at City College called Realizing the Dream of a Black University. They tried to make City College Black. Just as the Howard students tried to make Howard Black. The previous year. Some of them, in fact, came down from New York during that occupation. But this is the excerpt. Toni Cade Bambara had dreams, but they were not deeply rooted in the American dream. Bambara dreamed of a space inspired by Black women turning toward each other, a space where they could dismiss the liberal American dream in favor of a Black liberation dream, a space of disavowal and affirmation. No longer would experts determine what Black women's lives were or were not. No longer would history or literature frame their reality. No longer would a common notion of womanhood grounded in white feminism frame their ideology, their perception of the struggle. Turning to each other, Black women could be the authorities of their own experiences. Being Black and woman was credential enough to create a revolutionary sisterhood arrayed against the enemy of whiteness, of maleness, of America, of imperialism. For Black women, thinking and writing together was a, quote, embrace of the community and a hard-headed attempt to get basic with each other, end quote. Bambara dreamed of a revolutionary self grounded in Blackhood, a way to fully live against the contradictions inherent in the infection of Western thought in Black men and Black women in our very relationships to each other. We all needed an antidote to the, quote, poison and lies that assault the ego and threaten the heart, that put the entire movement in peril, end quote. Black studies and third world studies needed to devise a curriculum that was an alternative to this white presence that founded property relations and premised the fall on the assumed abject category of womanhood. We were not immune, for we sometimes accepted the premise in our relations. But there was no possibility for revolution under the sign of, quote, this society's sick definition of masculine and feminine, end quote. If Black studies could recover the meanings of the old relationships, then perhaps the emergence of a revolutionary self, which explicitly extricated the chauvinistic self, could inspire a common ideal of selfhood. Bambara dreamed of an artistic practice, faithful to the ways and souls of ordinary Black folk, of Miss Grandma Dorothy Mamdir, who taught her about a storytelling tradition that preceded theory, that theory could not even capture fully. To make a story, one needed, quote, mimetic devices, so that the tale is memorable, shareable. A story should be grounded in cultural specificity and shaped by the modes of Black art practice, call and response, a modality that bespeaks a communal ethos. The real territory for Black study could be found in the sounds of bebop musicians and with the performers and audiences at the Apollo and Harlem Opera House and women getting their hairs done in beauty parlors. In all those places of Black creative expression and in the very mode of living Black lives were lessons much deeper than the Criticist Project. More than that, it was in their language, in their codes, their tellings, that the question of salvation could be truly and faithfully realized. So when Mara dreamed a purpose, quote, I work to produce stories that save our lives. So I'm going to do 2 poems from my forthcoming collection, Holy Ghost Key. Holy Ghost Key is a collection that is written in the moment of me experiencing live music. And so James Phillips, who works at Howard University, the visual artist, member of Afrocobra. If you never heard of Afrocobra, make sure you go and search them up. Very important movement. But he talked about how part of his art practice came from taking his pad, his sketch pad, with him when he went to hear John Coltrane. And so when you look at James Phillips's art, it's really in conversation with sound, but you would never know that if you never heard the sound. And so I tried to write in the way that James Phillips drew. This first poem was written with the saxophonist, the young saxophonist he's really from Upper Darby, but we'll say Philadelphia, Emmanuel Wilkins. Shout out to Emmanuel Wilkins. We had Kwaku Sunbury a few weeks ago, part of our Black Space music series here at Sankofa. Kwaku plays drums in Emmanuel Wilkins' ensemble. And so this poem I wrote while listening to him up in Newport, Rhode Island, about 2 years ago. It's called Come Out. Actually, this is not the one from Newport. This is one I listened to during the pandemic, during the great era where all the music was live streaming. I actually enjoyed that because I didn't have to leave the house. And I got all my music fixed. Anyway, so this is from a piece that Emmanuel wrote called Blues Blood, Black People. No, Blues, no, what is it? I'm about to mess it up. But Blues Blood is in it. The concept of Blues Blood. Come out. Submit to sound as invocation of blues blood sacrifice. Sound as offering to the spirits, placed in large kettles over fire, fiddles piled high on plates, placed under oak trees, buried underneath the ground, provision for blessings. The alto saxophone builds a shrine to a ritual for a Black future. Ancestors, come on out, come out. The blood run deep, vocal lines run deep, invoking safe passage for gods who need space to sit as they negotiate on our behalf. Sing in memory of those who gave blood, not as nostalgia, but as a mercy. This blues blood is a mercy, and we are everything. We are everything we need. Chant their names, sing their praises. These phrases are for their ease, for their comfort. Sweet melodies, haunting rhythms show us what we have been through, what we leave behind, what is promised us. The blues have sentenced us to time served. Behind what is promised us. The blues have sentenced us, I said that already, to time served. Come out. The blues blood has blessed the land, has blessed my family. These musician diviners have made the sacrifice. And then finally, thank you. I'll read the title poem, Holy Ghost Key. This was the organist, keys player Corey Henry. During the pandemic, he would go into a studio with just a drummer, and they would just play music that came out of the old time Black church, which is interesting because Corey's not that old himself. And so some folk in our music community carry this old tradition in ways that illuminate that everything that is old, it can always be new. And so when he started playing, the first note that he hit was B flat. Any musicians in the room, B flat is a really potent key to play in. And he said that this B flat is the Holy Ghost key. It's the Holy Ghost key. And so this is the poem. Be flat and still, and know that I am God of our weary years and silent tears. Peace be still, help us on the way. New mercies we seek, prayers we answer for ourselves. Be flat and curve and bend notes and sounds of blackness we know. What can wash away this ill? Nothing but the blood, nothing but our blood we spilled for the transubstantiation of this thing called the modern world. Be flat and remember what he's done for me, oh happy day, when precious memories linger, long enough to erase the painful lies we already forgot. When we are the ghosts, the price of the disaster. Be flat and be holy and be acceptable unto you, who be creating rhythms for McIntosh County shouters who dance blessings, offerings they summon right now, oh right now. Get up and dance for these ghosts who refuse with the sharp end of Ogun's hatchet. Be flat and play Hammond, B3, black whispers in the darkness, secret passages through mountains we can tunnel through. A light unto our path, to Kalunga lines where we meet Holy Ghost, where life on the other side is life again. Be flat and feel, for I can feel him in my soul, for I can feel him in this soil when I reach out and touch somebody's hand, since all ghosts have partners, doubles, who practice collective escape, who be moving together, 1 and 3 and 1 and 3, and to the beat of the djembe, to the kit, the tom and crash, ride us, sweet chariot, so that we know when we feel it, when spirit move through us, when them bass lines move through us. Be flat and clear out these woods and turn down the pot, only a half step, a little lower in the register, where pain sat for a long time, for such a time as this. When you hum, the devil don't know what you're talking about. The hum is for us, for our ears, for our freedom. God's gonna trouble the water, so says the Holy Ghost. Be flat and let that Holy Ghost key tarry. Let it simmer and cook down some. Listen to Corey, repeat the voices he heard. Listen to life coming back around and around. It is well. It is well. It is well with our soul. So that was the reading. It almost as if, do we still need to have a conversation? But I think it's important, particularly for the category of aspiring writer, and also for the category of the Howard student and the Howard alum, to see this particular presence. Howard has a tradition of writing that is so vast, it's so deep. And we can only, as students, as faculty, we can only dip our toe in it. But even that is a huge undertaking, to be able to do that and come out with something, which is what we all have done. And so I want us to first start with, where does Howard show up in your development as a writer? What were some of the specific moments you experienced as a Howard student where it became clear, not only am I a writer, but I have to be a writer?
Okay, well, I'll say for me, 2003 was very important for me. A lot of stuff was going on. I ended up at Howard after getting kicked out of the University of Maryland and going through community college. But, when I look back on it, feel like I was supposed to be at Howard because in 2003, Dr. Tony Medina came to Howard, and for a lot of people who may not know Dr. Tony Medina, which is crazy, he comes out of the New Eureka movement. Very much under Amiri Baraka, and you hear a lot of it, a lot of the Black arts writers influence in Medina's work. But Medina is at Howard, and he basically opened his classroom up to like every poet in the city. And so it got to a point where his class would be like standing room only. People would be sitting on the floors. And again, these were people that didn't sign up for his class, but we all went through the curriculum that he had in place. And what was cool about it was that we didn't just read the books. Medina would bring his friends in, and then we break bread afterwards. But that moment for me was very important because I think as a writer, around that time I was feeling kind of dry in terms of inspiration. And through a lot of the prompts and stuff in this class, developed a lot of work. Also developed a lot of friendships. Melanie Henderson was one of the folks that came through that, what we call the school of the Funky Cold Medina, the U Street School. We called it so many things, but many people that went through Medina's class, they were not even thinking about publishing. They were just, we have one of the people that came through was Truth Thomas, who came into poetry through spoken word and slam, and actually clowned me for trying to write a book. But after going through Medina's class, Truth went and got his MFA and started his own press and named it after his wife. And, went on to win the NAACP Image Award with his book. His book was the first book that he published in the press. But a lot of people who went through there thought about MFAs, when they got their MFAs, and then some when they got their doctorates. So, it was a very important time for me and many other people who were part of what I guess it was a movement, but part of that period.
I'm also a student of Tony Medina. I don't know that there's just one specific instance I can name, but what I will say is that at some point during my undergraduate journey at Howard, I had an awakening. I had a realization that Dr. Shauna Morgan, Dr. Dana Williams, Dr. Tony Medina, that there was a scheme at work, that they were pushing me into this community and this legacy of Black writers who come through Howard University. And that sounds very duh, in hindsight, but I just did not even realize that when they would encourage me to, open for guest writers that we would have come here. I opened for Claudia Rankin as an undergraduate, and I knew it was a big deal at that time, but it's now years later, I'm no, that was a huge deal to be an undergraduate poet in Dr. Maida Jones's class, who's also just a luminary in her own right. I was being taught and mentored, and still am, by some of the premier Black poets of our time, and so that I had a moment, an aha moment like that during my journey at Howard, where I was hold on a second. It's not accidental that, I'm reading in front of Howard audiences, that my professors, Dr. Tony Medina was the first one who encouraged me to submit poetry. He actually forced us. He told everyone who was in that writing workshop, my friend Meta Sama is guest editing a journal, and you all are gonna submit a poem. And I was you can't make people submit work for publication. I was I've never done this before. I don't even know how this works, and what if they say no? And they did not say no. They published that poem. So, I realized at some point that there was real intentionality, not just behind mentoring us and teaching us the craft of writing, but also in inducting us into a community of Black writers, poets, scholars, thinkers. There's this long history and trajectory at Howard. All of the professors who I have studied with, are tied to other giants, people who, I feel like I can confidently say I'm in the tradition of Toni Morrison, because I'm in the tradition of Dana Williams, who was in the tradition of Eleanor Traylor, right? Who was very close with Toni Morrison and Toni Cade Bambara. That is the lineage that taught me at Howard University. So, yeah, it was that for me, just realizing that I was a part of a much bigger picture and that they saw something in me that they were willing to invest in intellectually and also tangibly, like sending us to Furious Flower and conferences and readings and things so that we could be in the room with people who we'd only ever read on the page.
I like that she said it was a scheme because I feel that now. That's the correct language. Like I can remember two things. Dana Williams editing me with a seriousness that I had never experienced by anybody, period, in anything that I ever did in my whole life. And I played football and basketball, right? And coaches can be critical, but Dana Williams' criticism, oh my God, it made me first want to quit. But then I realized that no, this is coming from somewhere else, right? And then like I also remember, since you mentioned some of the people that you mentioned, there was this Friday night, and I wanted to do the things that people do on Friday nights as undergrads. And Dana Williams, Greg Carr, they were like, no, you're not going. Do whatever. And so you go into this, and it happened to be Hearts Day. It was the last Hearts Day that Toni Morrison came to on campus.
Like, are you gonna say no to that? No.
I didn't know that was. But then now I know, right? And so Toni Morrison was there. Amir Baraka read. Sonia Sanchez read for Toni Morrison. Like it's a scheme. You're right. And so at that point, I didn't realize that poetry was in my future. In fact, I think that semester I was taking John Woodson, and John Woodson is a character. John Woodson, his class wasn't full. It was a class called Contemporary Black Poetry. It wasn't full, and I needed a class, and I didn't want to take an elective in the School of C or I wanted to take an elective in co-ops. I was in the School of Business, and so Dr. Woodson looked at the roster and said, "You're in what school?" And he kicked me out of the class. He said, "We don't teach those people. Y'all not serious. Y'all not serious." And so he said, "You can't come back." But I came back anyway. And I kept coming back. And because he couldn't kick me out, right? There's no, anyway. So I kept coming back, and that class, it was taught almost in like an old Black tradition. We had to actually memorize and recite Langston Hughes. We had to memorize and recite Amir Baraka. And everybody had to memorize at least for that semester 3 poems and get up in front of the class and recite it. If you missed a word, that was it. And so there's that kind of like bringing you into the tradition as well. I don't know how much that will work with this generation, but it was a thing for us. Like it was like now I can't recite the Weary Blues, but there's a point where I could, right? Which if you go back to going back to the Black church, that's what you did every year, twice a year for some people, Christmas and Easter, right? And you better remember your part, not just for Sunday morning, but for also dinner time when your family comes over, because you got to do it again. And then if your grandma wasn't there, you got to go to grandma's house and recite the same thing for her. And so there's a tradition, in other words, of not just poetry, but it's tradition of the word, the importance of the word, of speech. And so the next question that I want to ask you all is, after you got it and it's in you, what are the challenges of getting it back out?
So I kind of feel, I guess like I'm going to interpret this as like a question about process. So I was on another panel with a group of writers, and we were asked about our process. And so I think for me, not going to speak for myself, I've been fortunate where my process has evolved to allow different things in my life. And so what I mean by that was my process was one way when I was single, but then when I met my wife, the process evolved to allow her in it, and then it evolved again when we started having kids. So I do find now that writing less, but I don't look at it as like a bad thing. I look back to like when I was just cranking out poems, right? I'm like, oh man, I could never have writer's block. But when I go back and look at those pieces I was cranking out, they weren't really strong pieces. You know, I just get hit with inspiration and just crank it out. But I think, at least for me, like the more you know and the more you start to develop, the more critical and the more picky you are with like certain words or, you know, how you explore certain things. And so it comes, but I think one of the best things that I could do when I'm not writing is like immerse myself into another artistic discipline. So I'm a documentary filmmaker. So like I've been immersing myself in that. And then when the writing comes back, it's you know, it's always cool to see how like that other interest ends up informing the new work. So it's, you know, it comes when it comes, and there are prompts that I can use to get it out. But I'm always excited to see, you know, what comes with it, you know, once, you know, once the writer gets going. Because it's, I kind of feel like as I evolve, what I'm writing about evolves. And
Yeah, I chose, I mean, this life chose me and then I chose it back. So, you know, once I realized that there was a path, a career path for professional writing, I decided, okay, I want to pursue that, but I also wanted to continue the like deep scholarly inquiry that I was doing in African American literature at Howard. And so, you know, it was important to me after I left here that I went places that allowed me to do both, to be a creative writer as well as a researcher. And that they didn't think of one as less than the other, right? Because the poetry is also rigorous. It's also a scholarly practice. It is deep inquiry. And in some ways, it's sometimes harder than the research because it requires living. Like I have to live through the experiences in order to often write about them. So I chose it and I have really invested in what I chose. Like I decided to do an MFA after Howard, no break. I did 5 years at Howard. I did a bonus lab because capitalism, you know. And I got into my MFA program fully funded, which was amazing. And I went to Kentucky and I did that. And those 2 years went by very quickly. And I knew going into those 2 years that I wanted to do a doctorate, which is a long and arduous journey, as you know, Dr. Myers. And so I'm in that journey now. I'm in year 5 of what will hopefully be 7 of a PhD. But my poetry is still at the fore of everything that I do. And I agree with you, Alan, that I'm not always sitting down at my desk writing poems. I'm not always jotting them in my iPhone notes, but I'm always in the practice of thinking and experiencing, which allows me to write when I do sit down to compose a poem. I love film. I love television. I love seeing plays. I live close to New York City now, so I see a lot of Broadway productions and off-Broadway productions, smaller local theater productions. Like taking in other art forms allows me to have a bank in a way so that when I do go to the page to write something, there's a lot there. So yeah, that's, you know, I've never been a writer who believed in the like writers write every day mantra. Not because that's not valuable, but because that's never been my way. It just doesn't happen for me like that. I don't force it when it's not there. I allow the writing to call to me and speak to me. And so when I feel led, I do that. And sometimes that means I only write a word or a line and then come back to it months later and the rest of the poem is there. Sometimes that means I sit down and I compose an entire poem, you know, but I allow the muses, as it were, to move through me. I avail myself as a vessel. And in the meantime, I'm living, you know, I'm teaching undergraduate courses. I am writing a dissertation or something like it. I'm deeply involved in my church. So it's interesting. You've been talking about the church tradition. I grew up very churchy, very Kojic. And so, yeah, I'm living in the meantime, and the poetry inserts itself wherever it desires.
So we're going to begin to open up the floor for questions. But I do have one last question to Alan and Angel. Both of you write very deeply about experience, your own experiences, as we heard, and there's a really commitment to understanding the living, as you said, Angel. and how life creates not just, the vulnerable feeling of the artist, but also that it's even beyond just being an artist at some point, right? That there are things that you just have to say as dealing with your family with grief. No, I still have to say it. Maybe it causes something to happen between me and my family, but I'm still going to say this. And so my question is not that deep. Given that living experience is so critical to you all's approach to writing, and given that we're here to talk about Howard, do either of y'all have any Howard poems?
Well, I co-composed a poem while I was in undergrad with two other poets called "The Ground on Which We Stand."
Okay.
After August Wilson. Yeah. So I have a co-authored poem that's very much an homage to Howard University. Have I written one on my own? Not yet, but I think it's coming. I think it's in there. But I think Howard shows up in subtle and very overt ways throughout my writing. But yeah, I think the Howard poem. I mean, I probably could write a collection on Howard University, but I haven't yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I gotta give it back up to Angel. I haven't written that poem yet, and really just I'm a slow writer. So like something happens, I got friends that have got like chapbooks worth of stuff, and then they moved on to the next thing, and then I just start putting something down.
Yeah.
But I also don't view, so I'm not criticizing people that can knock out stuff because I think it's amazing. But I know from my process, like I don't really feel bad that I'm slow writing because I think spending time with something, once the trend has passed, you can't write about the fact that it happened because it already happened. But it kind of forces you to take a more nuanced approach, to a more layered approach. At least I find like when I'm writing about something, it's more layered and nuanced than it would have been if I had just jumped in and started writing about it. So I don't have any power poems yet. I think they're probably still slow cooking.
Okay.
But they come up eventually.
Maybe we need a Howard anthology.
Yes.
And
That's an idea.
About Howard, yeah.
That's an idea. And so I'm doing it again. I'm searching for something that I should know where it is. But there is, I don't know if you ever read the Shirley Ann Williams poem. Yes. Okay. Okay. So I'm just gonna read a little bit of this poem. I'm not gonna read the whole thing. It's a few pages long. But this is from one of Shirley Ann Williams' collections called The Provision Ground. The poem is called The Provision Ground. And it's for Eleanor and Winnie, the legends of our own time. The Kim buildings down behind Founders, the library in a hollow we call the Valley of Death. On Friday afternoons, the Greek lines rise from the valley, strutting and chanting, singing stories to the tune of soul songs of Alpha, Kappa, and Q. Ungawa. The A building overlooked the ghetto, that bad Georgia Avenue where a block boy will pick a pocket, kicking ass in a minute. Will do it just on GP. They don't like no frat walk. Every Friday it's a ritual. The Greek lines strut, the block boys shuck. Someone get down on somebody's head, beep bop, beep beep, Ungawa, beep beep, beep beep. Winter a bitch in DC. Trees all over the city, each one to have showered down leaves, niggas fighting other niggas. Lord, how do people keep living in this cold? Beep beep, Ungawa, beep beep. The CIA have an agent on campus, license number 313. The summer school office is bugged. Howard was named for a white man, Freedman's for some unknown black. So that's Provision Ground. Sorry, I'm passing the mic. So fine. Now let's open it up for questions from the audience. Anybody have any questions for us? And no question is a bad question. We hope. Yes. Is there a mic we can pass to the audience, y'all? Okay.
Just test it.
All right. Is this all right? Yeah. You're hearing me? I can project too. But my name is Alpha Jiri. I just want to say, first of all, thank y'all for sharing your words. And hopefully this is not a bad question, but I write some things in my notebooks that I keep to myself most of the time. I would like to put some things out there, get it published in some places, but I'm kind of taking my first baby steps. So I was wondering, what advice would you have for a writer in my position?
I'm gonna say just do it. That's the best thing you can do, you know, is just start putting the work out there, you know, when you're ready. But be selective about where you send it. I follow a lot of publications on Twitter. That's how I find out when they have open submission calls. But there's a portal called Chill Subs. That's a database of literary journals and magazines and contests and things, and that's a great, you know, database. But there's nothing to it but to do it. You just got to start putting it out there, and also know and be encouraged by the fact that rejection is a part of the process. You're gonna get no's. That's just a part of it. When you're sending work out, sometimes they say no because they've already accepted as many pieces as they can for an issue. Sometimes your piece doesn't necessarily fit in that particular issue or what they're doing at that time. But it is not an evaluation of the quality of the writing or of your talent as a writer. So just, you know that that's going to happen, but also know that there will be yeses, there will be acceptances. And so that's why I say be selective about where you send the work, because you want your work to be published in places that share the values and the mission that you share, that are going to understand and honor your work for what it is, not try to dilute it or distill it, who are going to share it with an audience that wants to read it and will care about it. So yeah, start sending it out.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback off that too. Is like when you're sending your work out, the more you start sending it out to journals, something happens. Like you start developing a national audience, and when you get to a point when you're ready to publish, it looks good when you send a manuscript to a publisher and you have an acknowledgments page of where the pieces have been published. I went to AWP, real quick, Association of Writers and Writing Programs, one of the largest writing conference in the country. And I remember sitting in on a panel, and the publishers were talking about they get so many submissions, book submissions, that they're looking for reasons to turn down manuscripts. And so one of that is going to the, seeing if it has an acknowledgments page, because what that tells them is if you have a list of places where you've been published, it tells them one thing, okay, if we publish this book, somebody other than us are going to know who this person is, right? It's also going to tell them that you have an audience, and a lot of publishers love it when writers are outgoing and pushing their work out, so yeah, just piggyback off of Angel, just seeing your work out, so many things end up happening for you, because again, when you're ready to publish, you've already made a name for yourself.
You'll see that in here in both my collections, but especially in this one. A lot of these poems were published elsewhere in journals and magazines because the press for this collection specifically requested manuscripts with poems that have been published in journals in other places. And when they ask for that, they're basically saying, have you been a part of a writing community already? Are these poems edited? Are they in their final form? Do people know your name somewhere? And so I agree completely with Ellen. It's always nice to be able to say, yeah, I have work published in the Gathering Together journal. That's a place you can start, I'm just... You already have. Okay.
This is a great question. I think these are really, really good answers to that question. I'll just add two things. One is, from the perspective of an editor, we know when something is being sent to us to be published and when something is sent to everybody. There's a difference. right? And so some writers, will read the advice as, well, I'm just going to send it to anybody, send my words to anybody, and just throw it out there and make sure something's there. As an editor, we know when that's done, right? We can tell. And we can tell when somebody is speaking to our journal, or speaking to our practice, right? And so if you are going to be the writer that sends it out widely, know what journals you are sending it to so that you can tailor your submission to what they actually publish. That's a big thing that's happening in the poetry world right now. A lot of people aren't doing that effectively, which is why they're getting the rejections they're getting. The other advice is we're all fellows of some institution where people applies to fellowships, because I can tell you that being in communities with people, these are the kind of questions and these are the kind of experiences where you will not feel alone. You will have the ability to, share stories with others about how they did things and I would say my fellow experience is great because we edited my whole manuscript together. And so apply to all of the fellowships that you can, that of course also mirror your interests and your approach. Those things will help you immensely. And then as a not minor, but also there are creative writing classes all over the place. Definitely take those, and even not just creative writing, screenwriting classes, playwriting classes, like any writing class, will help you become a better poet.
Thank you. I appreciate that word. If I could ask a follow-up question, because I was also thinking that if I want to write and put my writing out there, I really need to read more and kind of understand what y'all are talking about, I would need to understand what a publication is and understand the way they do conversation if I want to contribute to that conversation. So I'd like to know from y'all, are there any journals, anything that you think that I should be reading and keeping up with?
Yes. If you can, we got that Georgetown access now. African American Review, Callaloo have to be consistent. Obsidian, those three have to be consistent for any Black poet. You have to read them, even if you don't like it. Right? That's what's being put out right now. That's where you get that. That's where you get that particular conversation. I will say that also you may want to keep. I think. What's the poem a day?
That was just about to say
The poem.
poem.
Yeah.
Poem a day and poetry foundation.
That just keeps you, grounded in the poetry world writ large. And so yeah, just off the top, those are where I would say go. I have some others, but I'll let others speak.
Yeah, I would also encourage too to read anthologies. Anthologies were very helpful in helping me build up my library. So what I used to do is I'd go through the anthology and any writer whose work jumped out or I felt spoke to me, I'd put a star by their name in the table of content. And then when I had finished going through the anthology from cover to cover, then I started looking for their books. And I already had a list of writers that I could follow and learn from. But also too, anthologies are also places that you can submit your work to as well. So they have journals, but anthologies are another kind of publication, which are cool because some people, if you get an anthology with Yusef Komunyakaa, Pulitzer Prize winner, the people who are buying that anthology because Yusef Komunyakaa is in it, your work gets under their eyes, so just, these anthologies help you and your work get into arenas that by itself your work may not get into. So something to consider. Oh.
Cool. Are there any more questions from the audience? All right. Everybody's book is available for purchase. In fact, I think all of our books that are published are here and available for purchase. So all three of Alan's collections, both of Angel's collections, and my three books are available, and we will be happy to now transition into the signing. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank Angel. I want to thank Alan again for being a part of this, and also Michaela Skurlock, Christina Joy, and the staff at Sankofa, the founders of Sankofa. I'm highly interested in the agreement as well. Thank you all. He's going to have a good
I want to buy my constant prayer.
Thank y'all so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
No, I'm doing the scholarly writing.
Okay, so what are you doing?
In English. Yes.
Are y'all gonna go up?
I only sign in
Oh, okay.
But yes, we're going to.
So I did a lot of nonfiction.
Can I grab like a couple of each?
Sure.
Okay.
I was a pure arts minor, so fine arts.
But yeah, it's mostly like I first nonfiction because I went to college for journalism. So I did at one point I was doing a lot of like book reviews, and then some like I have a short story that's going to run in an anthology on so thank you. They have that the person